When I first started working at Weston and Company, I was just grateful to have landed a steady job in marketing after months of sending out applications that seemed to vanish into thin air. The company was one of the most respected firms in the city, and my boss, Mr. Weston, was known for his sharp business sense and no-nonsense attitude. I wanted to stay invisible, just do my work well, and quietly climb the ladder, but things never go the way you imagine. On my second week there, I met Henry. At first, he was just another face in the office until I realized who he was. He introduced himself casually, almost too casually for someone whose last name matched the one on the building. "I'm Henry," he said, flashing a smile that was just charming enough to make me forget how awkward I usually felt around new people. Later, one of my coworkers leaned over and whispered, "That's Mr. Weston's son. Don't get too comfortable." The warning was clear, but I didn't pay much attention. I figured it wasn't any of my business who he was related to. He seemed nice, and more importantly, he didn't carry the same intimidating presence his father did. Unlike Mr. Weston, who walked into a room like he owned not just the space but the people in it, Henry seemed approachable, funny, and easy to talk to. Over the next few weeks, we crossed paths more often. At first it was in the break room, where he'd make jokes about the terrible coffee machine that everyone hated but nobody dared to complain about because his father had picked it out. Then it was in the elevator, where he'd ask about my weekend plans or tell me some random story about a concert he'd gone to. Before I knew it, I was looking forward to those moments, the small conversations that made the office feel a little less stiff. The first real turning point happened during a late evening at work. I was staying late to finish a presentation when Henry walked past my desk, surprised to see me still there. He teased me for being a workaholic but then offered to stay and help, even though it wasn't really his department. That night, I saw a different side of him. He wasn't just the boss's son, he was genuinely smart, thoughtful, and interested in what I was doing. We laughed, ordered takeout, and when he walked me to my car, I caught myself wondering what it would be like to see him outside the office. That thought scared me because the unspoken rule was obvious: don't mix personal life with work, and definitely don't get involved with the boss's son. Still, when he asked me a week later if I wanted to grab dinner, I didn't say no. I told myself it was harmless, just a friendly meal. Except it wasn't. Over dinner, I realized he remembered the little details I had mentioned weeks ago, like how my favorite dessert was tiramisu or how I always carried around a notebook to scribble ideas in. He paid attention, and it felt refreshing compared to the guys I dated before who barely listened to half of what I said. One dinner turned into another, and soon we were spending more time together outside of work. We kept it quiet, mostly because I knew what it would look like if people found out. Dating my boss's son wasn't just risky, it was career suicide. Still, the secrecy made it thrilling. We'd exchange subtle glances during meetings, find excuses to bump into each other in the hallways, and then meet later at places where we knew no one from the office would see us. For a while, it felt perfect, like I had stumbled into something exciting that no one else could understand. But things started to change. Henry had a complicated relationship with his father. I began to notice it more once we got closer. He'd get defensive whenever Mr. Weston was mentioned, or he'd brush off questions about his role in the company. Sometimes he'd disappear for a few days, claiming he needed space, and when I asked about it, he'd grow distant, as if I had overstepped. At work, I could sense tension building. My coworkers started to give me looks I couldn't quite read, like they knew something but weren't saying it. A few times I caught snippets of conversation when I walked into the break room, the chatter stopping abruptly the moment I entered. It made me wonder if our secret wasn't as secret as we thought. The real trouble started when Mr. Weston himself began paying more attention to me. At first, it was professional. Asking me to sit in on meetings, complimenting my work on campaigns, but then it shifted into something sharper, more suspicious. He'd make comments that seemed casual on the surface but carried a weight underneath, like when he asked if I had enough time for work, considering how social I seemed after hours. I laughed it off, but my stomach twisted. It was only a matter of time before he found out, and I wasn't sure what would happen when he did. The night everything began to unravel was supposed to be a simple date. Henry had insisted on going to a quiet restaurant just outside the city, a place he promised was private. We were laughing, relaxed, and for the first time in weeks, I thought maybe we could actually make this work. But when I excused myself to the restroom, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. At the table behind me, two men were talking in low voices about Weston and Company and, more specifically, about Henry. One of them said something that didn't make sense, something about how Henry wasn't supposed to be involved in the company anymore and how his father had covered up an incident to protect him. I froze, trying to process what I had just heard, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they'd notice me standing there. When I returned to the table, Henry was smiling, completely unaware that everything I thought I knew about him had just been shaken. I sat across from Henry, nodding at whatever story he was telling, but my mind was stuck on the words I had just overheard. Wasn't supposed to be involved in the company anymore. Covered up. My thoughts tangled into knots. What incident? Why would his father need to cover anything up? I wanted to ask Henry directly, but the moment I looked at his face, relaxed and happy, the words caught in my throat. If I asked, he would know I'd been eavesdropping, and worse, I might learn something I wasn't ready to hear. So I smiled, laughed at his jokes, and pretended like nothing had changed. But inside, everything had shifted. That night when he dropped me off, he leaned in to kiss me, and I kissed him back, but my heart wasn't in it. My mind was buzzing with unanswered questions, and when he drove away, I stood in my apartment wondering if I had just stepped into something much bigger than a simple workplace romance. Over the next week, my curiosity started eating at me. I tried to keep things normal with Henry, but every time I looked at him, I thought about those men in the restaurant. I began paying more attention at work, listening for any mention of Henry, and soon I noticed little details I had ignored before. For example, Henry rarely attended meetings with his father, even though everyone assumed he had a role at the company. His name was on the staff directory, but his position was vague, consultant. No one seemed to know exactly what he did. The only thing clear was that his father treated him differently than the rest of us. Sometimes it was sharper, sometimes softer, but it always carried a tension I couldn't quite define. One evening after staying late, I ran into Megan from accounting. She was usually quiet, polite, never one to gossip, but as we rode the elevator down together, she gave me a look I couldn't ignore. "You're close with Henry, right?" she asked carefully. My stomach flipped. I managed to nod, trying to keep my face neutral. Megan hesitated, then said, "Just be careful. He has a way of pulling people in, but not everything is what it looks like." Before I could press her for more, the elevator doors opened, and she walked away, leaving me with another riddle instead of answers. By now I couldn't take it anymore. That weekend, I invited Henry over, determined to finally bring it up. I planned out what I would say, rehearsed it in my head, but when the moment came, I lost my nerve. He was sitting on my couch, telling me about some trip he wanted us to take together, and he looked so earnest, so hopeful, that I couldn't bring myself to break the mood. But then he said something that made my breath catch. "It'll be nice to get away from all the pressure," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes I feel like everyone's just waiting for me to mess up again." Again. The word rang in my ears. I asked casually, "What do you mean?" He froze for a second, then quickly brushed it off. "Nothing. Just, you know how my dad is." He changed the subject so fast I almost let it go, but my mind kept circling back. What had he done before that was bad enough for people to wait for him to mess up again? A few nights later, the answer came from an unexpected source. Mr. Weston called me into his office. I assumed it was about work, but the moment I stepped in, I felt the weight of his stare. He motioned for me to sit, and for the first time since I'd started, he wasn't talking about deadlines or clients. He was talking about me. "Megan," he said, his tone firm but not unkind, "you're one of the most promising employees here. You're smart, you work hard, and I see a future for you at this company. But I need to make something clear." My hands clenched in my lap as I waited for the blow. Stay away from my son. The words landed like a slap. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He leaned forward. Henry is complicated. He has his own struggles, and I won't go into details, but you don't want to be dragged into them. Trust me when I say it won't end well. I wanted to protest, to tell him he was overstepping, but the way he spoke left no room for argument. It wasn't just a warning, it was a command. When I left his office, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd collapse. That night, I couldn't sleep. Part of me was angry that my boss thought he could dictate my personal life, but another part of me was shaken. His tone hadn't been jealous or controlling, it had been protective, almost desperate. What was Henry hiding that his own father thought I should run from? I decided I had to know the truth. The next time Henry canceled on me with a vague excuse, I followed him. I felt ridiculous, like some paranoid girlfriend, but something in my gut told me I needed to. He drove across town to a rundown building I'd never seen before, parked, and went inside. I waited for 20 minutes before curiosity overpowered my nerves, and I went in too. What I found left me speechless. It wasn't a bar or a club like I'd expected. It was a support group. Through a cracked door, I saw Henry sitting in a circle of chairs, listening intently as someone spoke. I couldn't hear the words, but the atmosphere was clear. People were sharing their struggles, confessing things they carried on their shoulders. My stomach dropped as I realized what this meant. Henry wasn't just keeping a secret from me. He was hiding an entire part of his life. I stood frozen outside that door, staring through the narrow gap, my breath caught in my throat. Henry wasn't laughing or making small talk like the man I knew. He looked tense, serious, almost fragile. His shoulders hunched forward as though the weight of the world was pressing down on him, and for the first time I realized I didn't know him as well as I thought. After a few minutes, I pulled myself away and hurried outside before anyone noticed me. The whole drive home, my mind replayed what I'd seen. A support group. But for what? Addiction? Anger issues? Something else? The next day when I saw him at work, he was back to his charming self, leaning against my desk with a crooked smile, making a joke about how exhausted he was. I wanted to blurt out what I'd seen, but fear stopped me. If I admitted I'd followed him, he'd never forgive me. And yet the questions gnawed at me more and more with every passing day. Eventually, I couldn't keep it inside any longer. One evening, when we were having dinner at my place, I asked him gently if he'd ever struggled with anything in the past, maybe something that made his father protective. For a moment his smile faltered, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, a flash of pain he quickly masked. Everyone has struggles, he said lightly, but his tone carried an edge. Why are you asking? I shrugged, pretending it was nothing, but I could tell he didn't believe me. For the rest of the night, he was distracted, checking his phone often, barely touching his food. When he left, I had the sinking feeling I'd crossed a line. The following week at the office, the tension grew worse. Megan gave me another one of her pointed looks, and even my boss seemed to watch me more closely, his eyes narrowing whenever Henry and I were in the same room. I felt like I was standing on a tightrope, everyone waiting for me to fall. Then one Friday evening, it happened. Henry showed up at my apartment, visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he paced my living room. I have to tell you something, he said, his voice unsteady. My heart raced. Finally, the truth. He sank onto the couch and rubbed his face. I'd been in recovery for 2 years now. Before that, I had a serious problem. Pills, alcohol, you name it. It nearly destroyed me. My dad kept it quiet because of the company. He didn't want the media finding out. That's why people look at me the way they do. That's why he doesn't want me dating anyone from the office. He thinks I'll ruin everything again. His words tumbled out quickly, like he'd been holding them back for too long. I sat beside him, my mind spinning. On one hand, I felt relief, finally I knew what he'd been hiding. On the other, I was terrified. Addiction wasn't a small thing. It was heavy, complicated, and dangerous. But when I looked at him, I saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the honesty he hadn't shown me before, and I couldn't just walk away. "Thank you for telling me," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, he looked like he believed me, like maybe I could really be the person who stayed. We held each other for a long time, and for the first time, I thought maybe we could get through this. But as the weeks passed, cracks began to show. Henry was trying, I could see that, but his mood shifted unpredictably. Sometimes he was upbeat and full of plans for the future, and other times he withdrew completely, ignoring my texts and calls. I tried to be patient, but the secrecy and the pressure of hiding our relationship at work were wearing me down. Then came the night that changed everything. We had been invited to a coworker's birthday party at a downtown bar. I almost didn't go because I knew it would be risky, but Henry insisted, saying it would be fine. At first, it was. We laughed, mingled, pretended to be nothing more than colleagues. But then I saw him at the bar, a drink in his hand. My stomach dropped. I knew he wasn't supposed to be drinking. I rushed over, whispering, "Henry, what are you doing?" He looked at me, his eyes glassy, his smile a little too wide. "Relax, it's just one," he said. But I knew better. One was never just one. Panic surged through me as I tried to take the glass from him, but he pulled away, his voice rising loud enough for others to hear. "Why do you care so much? You're not my babysitter." The room went silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward us, and in that instant, I knew the secret was out. Whispers spread like wildfire, and I could see the judgment in their stares. Megan's face was pale, Mr. Weston's son, drunk at a company event. It was exactly the disaster everyone had warned me about. I pulled Henry outside, my hands shaking, but he yanked away from me. "I knew this would happen," he muttered, his words slurred. "You'll leave me just like everyone else." He stumbled down the street, and I stood there, torn between chasing after him and protecting what was left of my own dignity. By the time I made it home, my phone was buzzing nonstop with messages, coworkers asking if I was okay, Megan telling me to be careful, and one unread message from Mr. Weston himself that made my heart sink. My office. Monday morning. "We need to talk." All weekend I couldn't shake the dread building inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Henry at the bar, his voice sharp, his glass in hand, the way everyone looked at me like I was part of the problem. By Monday morning, I barely slept, and walking into Mr. Weston's office felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. He didn't waste time. "Megan, sit down," he said firmly. His expression was harder than I'd ever seen, the calm mask of a man used to being in control. He folded his hands on the desk. "I think you know why we're here." My voice shook. "Yes, sir." He sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. "You're talented. You have potential here, more than most people your age. But my son," his jaw tightened. "He's not stable. You saw it yourself. He's been through things you can't even begin to understand, and every time someone tries to help him, he drags them down too. I can't let that happen to you, or to my company." I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him Henry wasn't just a burden, that he had good in him, that I cared about him. But Mr. Weston's stare was piercing, cold. "End it. Whatever is going on between you two, it stops now. Or you can hand in your resignation." The words hit me like ice water. My job was everything I had worked for, everything I thought would give me stability after months of struggling. Could I really throw it all away for a relationship that was already cracking under pressure? Still, part of me wanted to fight back. "With all due respect," I said quietly, "this is my decision." His expression hardened further. "Then don't expect protection from me when things fall apart." I left his office trembling, torn between anger and fear. At my desk, I avoided everyone's eyes, but the whispers were louder now. The rumor had spread fast, Henry drunk at the party, me trying to cover for him, the boss's son spiraling again. No one said it outright, but I felt their judgment in every sideways glance. That night, Henry showed up at my apartment, eyes bloodshot, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I messed up, he admitted before I could even speak. I slipped. I shouldn't have gone to that party. I shouldn't have had that drink. But I promise, Megan, I can fix this. His desperation cut through me. I wanted to believe him, to believe that one mistake didn't define him. But then he added, please don't leave me like the others did. That plea sank deep into my chest, pulling at my guilt and my compassion all at once. I told him I wasn't leaving, but a part of me wondered if I was lying to both of us. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched him oscillate between determination and despair. Some days he was upbeat, swearing he was back on track, attending his meetings, writing plans for his future. Other days he was unreachable, ignoring my calls, disappearing for hours. It was exhausting, trying to hold both of us together while hiding the cracks from the outside world. And then the twist came. One afternoon, Megan from accounting caught me in the hallway. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then said quietly, you think you're helping him, but you don't know everything. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? She hesitated, then leaned closer. The incident 2 years ago, the one his dad covered up. It wasn't just about drugs. It was about someone getting hurt. My stomach dropped. Hurt? She nodded grimly. An employee. A junior assistant. He was high at work, lost his temper, and pushed him during an argument. The kid ended up with a broken arm. They paid him off, made him sign an NDA, and sent Henry to rehab. That's why people here don't trust him. That's why your boss is so protective of the company's image. I could barely breathe. Pieces clicked into place, the secrecy, the stares, the constant warnings. This wasn't just about Henry's personal struggles, it was about real damage, about lives that had already been affected. That night, when I confronted Henry, he didn't deny it. His face crumpled, and he whispered, it was an accident. I didn't mean to hurt him. I wasn't myself. Tears stung my eyes as I listened. Part of me wanted to hold him, to tell him I believed him, but another part screamed that I was in over my head. This wasn't just about love anymore. It was about responsibility, about the risk of tying myself to someone who had already burned so many bridges. He begged me to stay, promised he'd do better, promised this time would be different. I told him I needed space to think, and for the first time since we'd started, I saw fear in his eyes, not of losing his job, not of his father, but of losing me. I spent the next few days torn in half, trying to balance the loyalty I felt toward Henry with the reality that everyone else seemed to see more clearly than I did. At work, Mr. Weston watched me silently, as if waiting for me to make the inevitable choice. But I wasn't ready, not yet. Because despite everything, part of me still believed there was more to Henry than his worst mistakes. I told myself I needed space, but the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every morning when I walked into the office, I half expected Henry to appear at my desk with that easy grin, pretending nothing was wrong. Instead, he stayed away, and the silence between us grew heavier. At work, the whispers had turned into a quiet certainty. Everyone knew, everyone had opinions, and no one thought it would end well. Megan avoided eye contact, my boss's stare hardened each day, and I felt like I was slowly suffocating under a weight I had chosen to carry. Then, one evening, Henry called. His voice was shaky but clear. Megan, I need to see you. Please. Just one last chance to explain. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop far from the office, somewhere no one would recognize us. He looked exhausted, his hair unkempt, his eyes ringed with dark circles. But he also looked determined, as though he had finally decided to stop running. I know you don't trust me, he began, his voice low, and you have every reason not to. I screwed up, and I've hurt people. I can't change the past. But I want to change the future. With you. I stared at him, torn between hope and fear. Henry, it's not just about us. Your father, the company, this affects everything. He reached across the table, his hand trembling as it brushed mine. Forget the company. Forget him. This is about me proving that I'm not the person I used to be. And I need you to believe that. His desperation was palpable, and for a moment, I wavered. But then I remembered Megan's words, the assistant's broken arm, the cover-up. Could love really outweigh all of that? I pulled my hand back. Henry, I care about you. But caring doesn't erase what's happened. It doesn't erase the risk. His face fell, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. If you can't stay, I understand. But if you leave, I don't know what will happen to me. That last line stuck in my chest like a blade. It was more than love, it was a warning, a cry for help wrapped in a threat. I left the coffee shop that night shaken, unable to decide whether I was saving him or destroying him by walking away. The next morning at work, I found an envelope on my desk. No name, no note, just a single photograph inside. It was Henry, at a bar, a drink in his hand, clearly taken recently. My blood went cold. Someone wanted me to see this. Someone wanted me to know that Henry wasn't just struggling privately, he was slipping again. I didn't know who left it, but when I looked up, Megan was across the room, her expression unreadable. That evening, I went to Henry's apartment. The moment he opened the door, I smelled it, alcohol, sharp and undeniable. He tried to hide it, but the evidence was all around, bottles on the counter, and unfinished glass on the table. My heart sank. Henry, I whispered, what are you doing? He looked at me with glassy eyes, anger and shame mixing in his face. I tried, Megan. I really did. But everyone already thinks I'm a failure, so what's the point? His voice cracked, and for the first time I realized how deep his pain went. This wasn't just about addiction, it was about identity, about never being able to live up to his father's shadow. The point, I said softly, is that you can still change. But I can't do it for you. He laughed bitterly. So that's it? You're leaving me too? Tears blurred my vision as I turned away. I can't save you, Henry. You have to save yourself. I left his apartment, my heart breaking, but a strange sense of clarity settling in. For weeks I had been caught between love and fear, hope and denial. Now I finally understood, I couldn't sacrifice myself for someone who wasn't ready to fight for himself. The next day, I walked into Mr. Weston's office and told him the truth. I ended it, I said simply. His expression softened with relief, but there was also sadness in his eyes. You did the right thing, he said quietly. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you did. I nodded, though my chest ached. I wanted to believe him, but a part of me felt like I had abandoned Henry when he needed me most. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, the hopelessness in his eyes, the way he had begged me not to leave. I tried to convince myself it wasn't my responsibility anymore, that he had to make his own choices. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. Because 2 days later, I got a call that changed everything. The call came early in the morning, when I was still half asleep and fumbling for my phone. It was Megan. Her voice was urgent, trembling. Megan, it's Henry. He's in the hospital. My stomach dropped. I barely heard the rest of what she said, just fragments, overdose, ambulance, critical. I threw on clothes and rushed to the hospital, my heart hammering the entire way. When I arrived, the sterile smell and the fluorescent lights felt suffocating. At the front desk, I barely managed to choke out Henry's name before they directed me to a waiting area. And there he was, Mr. Weston, sitting rigidly in a chair, his face pale, his hands clasped so tightly they were turning white. For the first time, he didn't look like the powerful man who ran an empire. He looked like a father, terrified and broken. He glanced up when he saw me, and for a moment, I thought he'd tell me to leave. But instead, his eyes softened. He's stable, he said hoarsely. Relief washed over me so strong my knees almost buckled. They pumped his stomach. He's going to make it. But this, his voice cracked. This has to be the last time. I sat beside him in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us both. Hours passed before a doctor finally came to tell us Henry was awake. When I walked into his room, my heart ached at the sight of him, pale, weak, tubes and monitors surrounding him. He looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way I'd never seen before. His eyes fluttered open, and when they met mine, they filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I took his hand gently, my own tears spilling over. "Henry, you scared me. You can't keep doing this to yourself." He shook his head weakly. "I thought I lost you. I didn't know how to handle it. I couldn't." His honesty broke me, but it also made me realize something I should have seen long ago. I loved him, I couldn't deny that. But love alone wasn't enough to save him. He had to choose to save himself. "Henry," I said softly, squeezing his hand, "I'll always care about you. But I can't be the reason you get better. You have to want it for yourself." His lips trembled as he nodded slowly. "I know. And this time, I want to try. Really try." Mr. Weston stepped into the room then, his eyes red, his voice thick with emotion. "You scared me half to death, son." For a moment, I thought Henry would lash out, but instead he just whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." And in that fragile moment, I saw something shift between them, not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Over the next few days, Henry was moved to a recovery program, this time stricter and more intensive than before. Mr. Weston insisted on handling everything, and for once, Henry didn't resist. He admitted himself, committed to staying as long as it took. I visited him once more before he left. He looked stronger already, determined in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For not giving up on me completely, even when I made it impossible." I smiled sadly. "Just promise me this time it's for you, not for me, not for your father. For you." He nodded, and for the first time, I believed him. Leaving that hospital, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. I knew Henry and I couldn't be together, not now, maybe not ever. But I also knew that walking away hadn't destroyed him, it had pushed him to face the truth. Back at work, things slowly settled. The whispers faded, replaced with a cautious quiet. Mr. Weston never brought up our conversation again, but every time our eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding. He knew I had cared for his son, maybe more than anyone else had, but he also knew I had chosen to protect myself. Months later, I heard updates through Megan. Henry was still in recovery, still working on himself. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Dating my boss's son had been a disaster, yes, but it had also taught me something I would never forget: love can be powerful, but it can't be the cure for someone else's demons. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step back and let them fight their own battle. And as much as it hurt, I finally understood that letting go wasn't failure, it was the only way either of us had a chance at healing.